Well, it looks as if China has the power couple that they've been dreaming of to take the White House, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. This is so interesting because the predictions I made in episode 253, the last episode, about how China needs someone in the White House to allow them to take Taiwan. This is stunning and it's frightening, and we're going to talk more about Tim Walz and Kamala in just a moment. But I've also got an interview coming up with one of two people who have seriously debated Kamala Harris. The last guy to debate her was Mike Pence. Mike actually didn't do a very good job. He was robotic, as usual, incredibly articulate, but he had nothing to say to really put a nail in the coffin and win the debate. However, the guy who debated her before that, when she was running for Senate in California, was Tom Del Beccaro. Tom's the former chairman of the California GOP. He's the last chairman they ever had, and probably the last one they ever will have, who's a real conservative. He used to drive the rhinos in the state crazy. He was a regular interview on my San Francisco radio show. He debated her, he pinned her in a corner, and despite all of her lies and all of her moments to try to do a gotcha, he cleaned her clock. Tom's going to be along in just a moment. We're also going to be talking to Tom about his new book. He is an author of several books. He's a historian for sure, besides being an attorney. The book is called The Lessons of the American Civilization, Its Confident Rise, and the Warning Signs of Its Decline. Let me talk about Kamala and Tim for just a moment. China wants to take Taiwan, as I discussed in the last episode. They need its semiconductor business to upright their failing economy. They have a goal: dominate the West by 2049, the centennial of their communist regime. They need money. They need help. They want Taiwan. They will tell you those people are not Taiwanese, they're Chinese. They will tell you that used to be our island, so this is just moving back in. But they need someone in the White House who will allow this to happen. And I think to make this happen, it's something out of a spy novel. In fact, I think Jack Carr actually has written about this recently. But I would agree with this. They need somebody in the White House who's a patsy, someone who they can say, we'll help you with your campaign, we'll give you funding, we'll give you propaganda, we may even be able to help you cheat. We need you in the White House. We will help make this happen. But if you get there, you promise us this, let us take Taiwan. Well, now they've got Tim Walz. It's the perfect pick. Tim Walz is a student of China. This is a guy who in 1989 was doing some teaching there in relationship to his college degree. Spent a year teaching there in 1989. For those of you who don't know, 1989 was the Tiananmen Square uprising. Tiananmen Square was an effort to see the communist regime fail in China. The young people that were a part of this had heard about what happened in the Soviet Union and how it basically collapsed in a day in 1989. And they wanted to do the same thing in their country. These are people who loved freedom, wanted liberty, respected life, wanted to own property, the pursuit of happiness. So what happened with these young people who assembled at Tiananmen Square? I was working for CBS News at the time. I remember this distinctly. We were covering it live, and we saw the tanks rolling through. And we saw all the people being massacred, and then suddenly China just cut the feed. All the networks around the world were left with nothing, but there were still reporters there. And what they saw was a massacre. These young people just run over by tanks. I mean, literally the next day they're scraping their bodies off the pavement. It was awful. And Tim Walz was studying in China in 1989. And isn't it interesting that 5 years later, Tim Walz got married on the 5th anniversary of Tiananmen Square? And some might say, well, that was just a coincidence. Oh, no, 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 no. And then he went to honeymoon there. and he's been there many times. It would seem as if he's a fan, but oh my goodness, today we have the Washington Post and Newsweek and Time Magazine and so many, and the New York Times, all interestingly coming out with editorials, all on the same day saying, no, 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 no. He's he's very curious about China. He wants to study them, but he's not pro China. Right, right. See, this is why I remember when my uncle, who lives in northern Minnesota, he talked to me after Walz was elected governor of that state. He said, "Yeah, Brian, it appears as if we've got a communist now running the show here in Minnesota." Sorry if I bastardized the accent, but I didn't know that this guy really was a communist. Oh no, he's not pro-China. So this is what we have, friends. Kamala Harris so despises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, so despises the founding of this country, so despises our exceptionalism that she's picked a running mate that's basically the male white version of herself. It's perfect to talk to Tom Del Beccaro about this right now because Tom is a wonderful thinker. He's passionate about this country. He understands its history very, very well. And I want to talk to him about American exceptionalism. And I also want to talk to him about his debate with Kamala Harris. So let's bring him into the room right now. By the way, more on me at briansussman.com. And while you're there, you can learn more about me and my books. But here we go with Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, it is great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
So great to be on, Brian. Glad you're doing so well.
You know, I recall when you debated Kamala Harris in 2016, because the very next day you were a guest on my San Francisco radio show and you mopped up the floor with her. And we're going to discuss how Donald Trump can beat her in their upcoming debate. But I want to first talk to you about this new book, The Lessons of American Civilization, Its Confident Rise, and the Warning Signs of Its Decline. And before I do that, I just want to go to my notes really quick. You have some wonderful people who have endorsed this book. And
Thank
one
you.
of them is a guy I really like and admire so much, Steve Moore, the economist. He said, "This book reminded me why I'm so proud to have become an American. And it reminds us all, while being an American means much more than nationality, it means inheriting a set of ideas that represent both opportunity and obligation. Opportunity to live our lives in the greatest nation on earth." And I'm choking up as I say, as I read this because it's so powerful. And an obligation to fight to keep it so, especially today when the American idea is under assault, even from within. Uh, Tom, this book is so timely. So give us a brief synopsis and then we'll dive in after we talk a little bit about Kamala.
Well, as you know, my career has basically been in an effort to give people perspective of the past, of what's going on today, and hopefully from learning from the past and applying it to our future endeavors and trials and tribulations. And so this book, which I conceived of long ago, it puts American civilization in the light of the great philosophers who talked about how civilizations come together, rise and fall. It tells the story of America way back from the 1500s to a couple of months ago. My publisher had to cut me off saying, if you want this book published, stop writing, stop adding to it. And what I do is I come up with 10 of the most important lessons about America, but I help people understand how a civilization is born in faith religiously, but also faith in its basic purpose, which for America was opportunity and democratization. And then we go through how it grows so and did so very well. And then, of course, it started to lose that faith in itself and in its purpose and in religion. And there's been some consequences because of that. And I cover that as well.
I think it's really important as we just dive into Kamala for just a moment. Uh, you know, her view of American history, she needs to read your book, basically. because her view of American history is so skewed. She's one of those 1619 project people. Could you explain to our listeners what that's all about and why it's just so back-assward?
Well, of course, I'm not so sure Kamala knows too much of history. No socialist truly studies history, or they wouldn't be a socialist.
Good point.
But the 1619 project takes a moment in time and then places it completely out of context. Of course, their basic principle is that America was built on slavery and therefore it is a bad civilization, and you should not only shouldn't learn from it, but you should despise it, and or you should discount anything else that it has done. I do have an entire chapter in the book dedicated not to them, but to this issue of slavery and what it meant to America. And, the reality is, first, we must understand that there's more slaves today than at any time in history.
Good
But what
point.
I do in the book consistently is follow the great Thomas Sowell's request that we always ask, compared to what? And that's what is lacking in a socialist view, and certainly Kamala's in 1619.
Hmm.
Yes, there was slavery here, there was slavery around the world. That doesn't make it okay. Nobody I know thinks slavery's a good thing, or it's okay that it happened. But America made enormous strides, lost 700,000 plus people to extinguish it here and set its example. But no civilization is perfect. Brian, we are the royal we are much more harsh on others than ourselves. And also people tend to have this massive ego that they would have done much better if only they were back in time. And these are usually people without bereft of current accomplishments. But Kamala and the Democrats do not understand that large centralized government not only extinguishes freedom, but it impoverishes people over time
Hmm.
and divides a people. And that's what our program is set to do. And the lesson we can learn is how America succeeded, not how it's failing, and reapply the failing aspect.
Yeah, there is a significant portion of your book where you talk about the danger of centralization of power. And when I look at the Democratic Party, that's to me, it kind of sums up their agenda in a nutshell, doesn't it?
Yeah, America succeeded because it started with 13 colonies and no centralized government. Economic and political power were dispersed almost evenly throughout the states. Virginia and New York were obviously more powerful than some of the other states' colonies. And it succeeded because of the level of freedom and the opportunity that existed. In fact, the great Adam Smith, the legendary economic historian, called out America, which I quote in the book, because of its ability to succeed because of that.
Hmm.
But today, Brian, that is not where we are. Government's by far the largest industry in America, over 37% of the economy. You throw on regulations, you get into the mid 40s. And government requires conformity. It mandates things. And that's the opposite of opportunity, because the individual's ability to succeed is what made America great, and government is making that more difficult by the day.
Hmm.
So we still have Elon Musk who come in and disrupt the apple cart of establishment. We have people who rise from nothing, like a Charles Barkley, to become a media sensation. That still exists. Mark Zuckerberg didn't have a lot of money. In fact, I cite in the book, 80% of all existing millionaires in America today are self-made.
Wow.
And most importantly, you can never get an Abraham Lincoln in Russia or in China. Someone who came from nowhere to change everywhere.
Let's talk about Kamala and your debate with her. It was 2016. I remember watching it on television. I was so proud of you. You just literally cleaned her clock, mopped her up. But it's interesting, Tom, when you watch this debate, um, She was quick with her little flippant one-liners. When you were just nailing her about some particular issue, she didn't really want to talk about the issues much. She was busy pretending like she was writing out some notes on her little script. And I remember something you said to us on the radio the next day. It was, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect was, I couldn't believe how much she was lying. But
Yeah.
talk to us about that debate, if you would.
Yeah, so this was the U.S. Senate race. The debate was at UOP. I'm pretty sure it was April or May of 2016 in advance of the primary. There was five of us on the stage. I was fortunate enough to be right next to her. That created easy camera access for the
Yes.
both of us there. And what I realized then, and also from her most recent debates when she was, quote, running for president, which she obviously never actually, and I was the first in the country, I don't know if you remember, Brian, to say that she would never enter Iowa. But what I noticed is she's what I call a one-punch boxer. She has the quips you referenced a minute ago, but no follow-up. And like, take our debate, and this clip is still on. You could just go to U.S. Senate race, Del Beccaro and Harris, and put that in. She, if you remember, was prosecuting her office, David. I think I can't remember his last name, who had uncovered what Planned Parenthood had done, and she was effective. Even though Planned Parenthood was also under investigation, she was siding with them publicly. She was also advocating for them on websites. And I said, that's a conflict of interest. If you're the attorney general, you should not be doing that sort of thing. And when it came time to her, she demanded response time. And her response was, and this is who she is, she said, I'm a proud advocate of a woman's right to choose. Well, that wasn't the issue, was it? The issue was that she has a conflict of interest and is not fair as attorney general. And then also what she did right after it, which I was learning at that time because wasn't aware she did it so often, she went into her famous laugh. And
Yes.
the reality is, you can read Psych 101. Someone who laughs like that, it has a basic insecurity. And that's what she has. And think about it. She's not answering any questions now, Brian. Why? Because they've told her they know she's not good at this. But could you imagine running for president and not answering questions? She doesn't even have the word economics on her website. Number one issue in America,
Right.
the economy.
Right.
So what I learned and what President Trump needs to understand is you don't have to hit her over the head. You don't have to insult her. But you do need to challenge her with a view. If I was President Trump, I would turn to her and say, well, tell us the difference. Where did you disagree with Joe Biden? And did you do that publicly ever? Or do you still believe that we absolutely have to get rid of all forms of fossil fuel energy? Because she said all those things. And then watch her dissemble. If you remember the NBC interview where he just asked a simple question, you haven't been to the border, and she can't handle that. So that's what you need to do. Simple, direct questions. You don't have to insult her and give her the lead time to wound herself.
I would have thought, given her, status as a district attorney and then the district attorney of San Francisco and attorney general, she's spent some time in court. I would have thought she would have been a lot better in a debate. But what a failure. Your thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, and I've been reading that people from her DA's office said she wasn't that good in court. Not everybody is, but remember, she's had a gilded life. Willie Brown put her in that office, and then they cleared the race for her for attorney general. She never really had to campaign or make the argument as to why she should be. The U.S. Senate race, I have a healthy ego, but let's face it, was California. It was a huge uphill fight. And so she didn't have to fight hard for that. She didn't have to do press conferences and defend anything.
Yeah.
She couldn't answer questions. I don't know if you remember from the debate, she was asked, do you support or find any trouble with Obama's Syrian policy? She couldn't answer it. And even the Chronicle said,
Right.
Okay, but will you answer the question? So, and then when she went to do this national campaign, she didn't succeed at that either. So no, she's not that good. One other point that Trump needs to understand, she bears the reflection of her last advisor because she doesn't have the depth and doesn't work hard. So when she was under Willie Brown, she had a mixed record as DA. Wasn't
Right.
all bad, but the farther she got away from him, and you know this, Willie Brown is a kingmaker. He's a Democrat, but he's practical. He doesn't want, he doesn't say go overboard. Well, she's gone overboard because to get noticed in the Democrat Party, you have to be louder and
Hmm.
you have to be lefter.
Right. Right. Um, you remember my sidekick from radio, Katie Green? Did
Of
do you
course.
did you know her dad was a Superior Court justice?
Yes, yes, I
Okay, good.
remember.
So, well, we won't have. I don't. He said I could mention his name, but I'm not going to mention his name. But I texted him this morning, and he. I'm glad you brought this up. And for those of you watching, you're saying, okay, who's Willie Brown? So Willie Brown was once the mayor of San Francisco, and he was a speaker of the legislature in Sacramento. Kamala Harris had a famous affair with him, and years later, he actually told the Chronicle that that affair I opened up doors for her career. So here's what Katie's dad said. Her affair with Willie was all about getting his support, getting appointments, and she did in Sacramento. She made a lot of money off those appointments, and access to his supporters and donors. So it sounds to me like this is a climber. This is a person who's had some aspirations for higher office for a long time, correct?
Yes, but she's going beyond her field. It's one thing to be an attorney and say, okay, I can be attorney general.
Right?
It's a whole nother thing. The world's on fire right now, Brian,
Yes,
and
yes.
she doesn't, you don't pick up foreign policy overnight. And the LA Times, I don't know if you remember, I wrote about this at Fox. The LA Times reported in her first year as vice president, she missed 200 briefings. 200. So she doesn't have the diligence or the desire to know more. And remember what JFK said, that domestic politics can defeat us, but foreign policy can kill us.
Hmm.
This is no time, I'd say, on the job training, but it's worse than that.
If I may, when I began this podcast before I connected with you on the air, I was talking about Tim Walz. This is the new power couple going to Washington D.C. trying to become president of the United States and vice president. But with Tim Walz's China background, I mean, getting married on the fifth anniversary at Tiananmen Square, doing his honeymoon in China, um, and now all the media outlets are saying, well, he's a student of China, but he's not pro-China. What do you make of this guy? And what do you make of this pairing? And what would you make of this administration should it actually happen?
He's not, he's a student of it. Is that why he said that one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness?
Right.
I mean,
Oh, yes, yes.
he volunteered that. So he believes big government is the answer. Here's what I make of it. It's a move of weakness. Last I recall, Brian, you've read a few history books. I've written a few. Minnesota has never been a deciding factor in a presidential election.
Hmm.
So why do you pick someone from a small state that's been blue forever? The answer is because Josh Shapiro would have outshined her. And Josh Shapiro has a mixed record. There's polling that shows that he has broken his promises, and people in Pennsylvania haven't forgotten him for that. But I also think, in defense of him, who many think has a future, there's the Geraldine Ferraro effect.
Hmm.
If you recall, she ran with who? Somebody from Minnesota, Walter Mondale, and was never really heard from again on the national side. When you lose badly or with someone who's shouldn't be running,
Right.
it's a high risk operation.
Yeah.
So this is a defensive move. It basically writes off Nevada and Arizona and demonstrates that it is said that she was afraid or she didn't want Shapiro to outshine her. And then don't believe me, but Van Jones saying that anti-Semitism is marbled into the Democrat Party. So this is a weak choice.
Right.
So did it get easier for Trump to win? Yes. But we also know in my book, The Divided Era, that the Democrats will vote for anyone with a D by their name. Republicans are a little bit more circumspect, and they're going to have to win by a lot to make this come true. You also want to win the Senate and the House so you can actually do something.
I've heard this said so many times over the years, but now I believe it. Uh, this is the most important election of our lifetime. I want your thoughts on that.
Well, I think I put this in my book, The Divided Era. Mathematically, if government is larger than the prior election, then its capacity to do things is larger, including harm. And therefore, by definition, every election is becoming more important. Also, in the technological age, important rises. And I talk about this in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization. The capacity for government to control you, to spy on you, to censor you is exponentially larger today than ever because of technology. So placing it in the wrong hands, Merrill Garland, James Clapper, all of those types,
Hmm.
is ever more dangerous. And we have to clean house there. I've said that numerous times in the past. That's gotten me in trouble for saying it, but it remains true, Brian. This election, if the Republicans don't win, then the dirty axe will be buried again. And a new attorney general for the Democrats, probably someone even worse than Merrill Garland, will take advantage of the Fourth Amendment, if not erase it.
Mm.
And so, from my perspective in the book, look, you can change economic policy, even though they're harming us, but you take huge chunks out of the republic when, let me put it a different way. I say we're in an age where those in power are protecting themselves from us. They want our money, but not our 2 cents.
Mm.
And they are trying to determine who can be president. That is why we must beat them as citizens and reclaim our right to decide who becomes president.
It's amazing. I see poll after poll illustrating that younger Americans are very socialist minded when it comes to things like the economy. But something you talk about in your book, Tom, is that capitalism, capitalism is, I believe you called it the legacy of making democracy possible. So in other
Yes,
words,
that's
our
its greatest
capitalism has
legacy.
allowed for this wonderful form of democracy, correct?
Yeah, I say that dissent is the mother of democracy and capitalism its father. And what I mean by that is for most of history, there was no capitalism. There was monarchs, lords, feudal lords who owned the land or maybe parceled out a little bit to you. But generation after generation were in poverty. And in that poverty, it was political poverty because they had almost no say.
Hmm.
That's most of history, poverty for 90 some percent of the world. With capitalism, which didn't start all at once and it wasn't voted in, but what happened in fits and starts is that a new wealth was created. Under monarchs, land is the wealth, right? Under capitalism, it would be selling a sweater you made or something off a cart or your excess agriculture that you've been able to do. And then slowly but surely, maybe you open up a business. And now the new wealth is money, it's goods, and it's services. And the more that economic power is drawn away from political power, you have a balance. And that is where republics and democracies begin. And that's their foundation. And when you keep them separate, you have stable foundations. That's how America succeeded, because economic and political power was dispersed throughout the country and there was no center in power. The problem today, if not the biggest danger, is that huge corporations and huge unions are dictating policy with big government deals. And you and I, even though we have a loud voice,
Hmm.
the average citizen has less and less say. So big government with big unions and big corporations is anti-democratic It's anti-republic and anti-freedom.
So how does a Donald Trump change that? I know when he was in office for those 4 years, he got rid of countless regulations, which
Yeah.
would which would help in this effort. But what else would it take, Tom?
It's overwhelming for someone outside of government to come in and grab the reins
Right.
of the biggest entity in the world. By the way,
Yes.
reason alone for Kamala Harris not to be president is she's never really managed anything. And now
No.
you want to make her CEO of the largest entity in the history of mankind? That would be foolish on a
Good
good
point.
day. So what Trump needs to do is not only to clean house, but he has to do the next step, Brian, which many politicians never do, which is to explain to America what he's going to do it, and then explain to America why that benefited them so that they get behind the
Mhm.
particular leader as to the benefits of doing this sort of thing. I mean, look at it. You could make the argument that the Department of Education is costing you X amount a year. It's been in place since the 70s, and yet no real metric shows that it has enhanced education. So they're taking your money but not delivering to your children.
Mhm.
You need to go on a massive PR effort, like MSNBC and CNN are doing right now for
Right.
Kamala,
Right.
and sell it to the people.
Historically, every nation, every country has a life cycle. And you talk a bit about this, but where are we in that life cycle? And then the next question is there a way to come back?
Well, the answer is yes. Great leaders in history have made a huge difference. Greece was headed to a very bad place and divided economically and politically, and the great leader Stalin made a compromise and put it back on the road to eventually creating democracy. So it is possible to make a difference. Where are we? Well, America believed in its purposes of democratization, home and abroad. It had great faith. It had succeeded in three international wars, one and two against evil dictators, and then again in Korea. And we felt good about what we were doing. We actually helped the world immensely. Most people don't know there was only 6 republics prior to World War II, and that shot up to 80 after in the 30 years afterwards. It made a big difference. Even Vietnam quoted from our Declaration of Independence. Maybe it was politics, but we made a huge difference. But the inflection point, and I know Joe Biden used that word and ruined it by saying it, but the inflection point for America is TV and the Vietnam War. And suddenly we were in a war that was broadcast that didn't seem to have the same good and bad uh, characters for us to glom onto. It was unclear why we were there. Russia wasn't involved. A bad German leader wasn't involved. Did we really need to be in the jungle? That was a huge inflection point. And then TV exploded in the 70s. And if you look at the chart of spending I have in the book, that's when spending exploded. And all sorts of problems have happened since then. That doesn't mean we have to remain there. As I said to you before, economic policy can be changed. So that's what's going on in Argentina. Sweden has gone from 75% government spending of the economy down below 50. Our task is harder here because of our media and unions. But I just came from a meeting with a client of mine. He's talking about employees wanting to work endless hours because they so believe in this new startup. So there's Americans who want to work.
Mhm.
There's still many of the people that are coming here illegally. They're still looking for opportunity. The problem is our government is getting in the way of it. So if we had a great leader, someone who was inspirational and sold America for what it is, which is this great land of opportunity, we could get back up and move forward, and we don't have to be as discouraged as it feels sometimes.
The lessons of the American civilization, its confident rise, and the warning signs of its decline. By the way, a great follow-up to his previous book, The Lessons of an American Civilization, and all of his books available at Amazon.com. I will link those up at briansussman.com and in the show notes as well. Tom, thank you very much for writing the book. Thank you for your love of America and trying your very, very best to equip us to go out there and fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Appreciate you, my friend. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on. I'm reminded of the end of in Casablanca, where Victor Laszlo was asked, what Humphrey Bogart asked him, well, why are you doing this all? And he said, you might as well ask why I breathe. Take care. Thanks so
Right
much.
on, man. All right, buddy. Thank you very much. God bless you.